When the young men of a society stop building and start checking out, the empire has less than 20 years left. It is not a political statement, it is a historical stopwatch, and the timer just started ticking for us. We are watching the gears of the great machine grind to a halt. You see it in the headlines about labor shortages. You feel it in the strange, stagnant atmosphere of our cities. You hear it in the silence of a generation that has decided the game is no longer worth playing. The mainstream media calls it failure to launch. They call it laziness. They call it a crisis of masculinity. They are lying to you. They are distracting you with culture war noise to hide an economic reality they engineered. What is happening right now is not a glitch. It is a rational response to a broken incentive structure. It is the return of a historical cycle that precedes the collapse of every major power, from Rome to Weimar Germany to the Soviet Union. The social contract has been shredded, the economic ladder has been pulled up, and the architects of this disaster are terrified because the engine of growth, the ambition of young men, has just been turned off. They didn't just check out, they were pushed out, and history tells us what happens next. The cycle is locked in, the math is terminal. Welcome to the final rotation. To understand the trap we are in today, you have to look at the blueprints of the past. History does not repeat, but it rhymes terribly. We have seen this checking out before. We saw it a century ago in the ashes of World War I. In 1914, the elites of Europe made a promise to an entire generation of young men. They promised them glory, honor, and a place in a new, prosperous world if they fought for the empire. Millions answered the call. 4 years later, those who survived crawled out of the trenches of Verdun and the Somme. They returned to a world that didn't recognize them and that didn't want them. The economy was shattered by wartime inflation. The jobs were gone. The promises were lies made by old men sitting in comfortable offices while the young bled into the mud. This birthed the original lost generation. Writers like Hemingway chronicled it, but millions lived it. They became cynical. They drifted. They rejected the values of the society that had fed them into a meat grinder. They didn't want to build, they just wanted to numb the pain. That social decay laid the groundwork for the economic collapse of 1929 and the rise of totalitarians in the 1930s. A society cannot survive when its strongest demographic feels completely betrayed by its leadership. We saw an even darker version of this in the final decades of the Soviet Union. By the 1970s and 80s, the communist dream was dead. The average Soviet man knew the system was a fraud. The state pretended to pay them, and they pretended to work. Rampant alcoholism decimated the male population. Life expectancy for men crashed. Why? Because there was no future to build toward. There was no incentive to strive. The state owned everything, controlled everything, and crushed ambition. When a man realizes that hard work does not lead to prosperity, but only to more exploitation by a parasitic elite, he stops working. He retreats. He finds escape in a bottle, or today, in a screen. The Soviet Empire didn't fall because of missiles. It fell because the men inside it simply stopped caring enough to hold it up. Look around you today. Does that apathy feel familiar? It should, because the same conditions have been recreated right here. The crisis of our modern lost generation was not caused by a war. It was caused by financial engineering. The villain in this story is not some vague concept of society. It is a specific set of policies enacted by central bankers and corporate oligarchs over the last 50 years. They fundamentally broke the connection between effort and reward. Go back to 1971, the moment the gold standard was abandoned. This was the moment the financial economy decoupled from the real economy. Before this, if you wanted to get rich, you had to build something, invent something, or provide a service people needed. After 1971, the easiest path to wealth was accumulating assets and letting the Federal Reserve inflate their value with printed money. This shifted the entire economic center of gravity from labor to capital. If you owned stocks, real estate, or bonds, you became fabulously wealthy without lifting a finger. If you relied on a wage, if you sold your time and your sweat, you were left behind. Look at the charts. Productivity soared, but wages flatlined. Where did the excess value go? It was siphoned off by the asset-holding class. The architects of this system created a world where the cost of the American dream grew exponentially faster than the wages needed to buy it. Housing, healthcare, education, the pillars of a stable life, their costs were hyperinflated by cheap debt, putting them permanently out of reach for a young man starting at zero. A young man in 1960 could buy a median home with 3 years of median wages. Today, it takes 8 to 10 years if he's lucky. In major cities, it's a mathematical impossibility. They told this generation, go to college, get in debt, and you will succeed. They obeyed. They graduated with mortgage-sized student loans into an economy that only offered gig work and stagnant salaries. The social contract was simple. Work hard, provide for a family, own a piece of the nation. The architects tore up that contract. They financialized the American dream out of existence. They turned the economy into a casino where the house always wins, and the players are forced to bet with their lives. And now they act surprised that the players are walking away from the table. The media calls this generation lazy. They attack them for living in their parents' basements, for playing video games, for not getting married, for not having children. This is victim blaming at an industrial scale. What we are witnessing is not laziness. It is a massive, decentralized strike. Young men are rational economic actors. They look at the landscape you have created and they run a cost-benefit analysis. On one side, a lifetime of debt slavery, working 60 hours a week just to tread water, paying half your income in rent to a BlackRock subsidiary, with no hope of ever owning assets, and facing a legal system in family courts that they perceive as hostile to them. On the other side, a low-cost existence, minimal effort, escapism through cheap digital entertainment, video games where effort is actually rewarded with status, and a rejection of the rat race. When the game is clearly rigged, the only winning move is not to play. Why should a young man break his back to support a system that hates him? A system that devalues his labor through inflation and imports millions of low-wage competitors to keep his salary depressed? Why should he man up and take on responsibility in an economy designed to strip him of authority and resources? The retreat into the digital world is not a character flaw. It is economic self-defense. They are opting out of a society that offers them nothing but burdens. This is the modern version of the Soviet pretend-to-work pact. The elites pretend to offer a future, and the young men pretend to participate. But this retreat has consequences that the central bankers cannot print their way out of. This is where the emotion ends and the cold, hard math begins. The math that guarantees the collapse. An economy is not just numbers on a screen, it is an ecosystem. And like any ecosystem, it requires energy to survive. For all of human history, the primary energy source for civilization building has been the ambition and labor of young men. They take risks, they build infrastructure, they defend borders. Most importantly, they form families and create the next generation of taxpayers and workers. Our entire modern financial system, the whole Ponzi scheme built on debt, is predicated on perpetual growth. It assumes that tomorrow will always be richer than today. It assumes a growing population to pay off the debts of the past. The system is designed to be funded by the taxes and the consumption of a vibrant, growing middle class. What happens when that demographic stops forming families? What happens when they stop buying starter homes? What happens when they stop aspiring to the corner office and choose a minimal existence instead? The tax base crumbles. The consumption engine sputters. We are facing a demographic winter that will make the Great Depression look like a mild recession. Birth rates are collapsing below replacement levels across the entire developed world. South Korea is already mathematically extinct. Europe and America are following close behind. Who is going to pay for the pensions of the boomers? Who is going to service the $34 trillion in national debt? The politicians think they can solve this with open borders, importing a new population to replace the one that checked out. But that only accelerates social fracturing and suppresses wages further, reinforcing the very cycle that caused the problem. They think they can solve it with AI and automation. But robots don't buy houses. Robots don't pay income tax. Robots don't take out mortgages. The financial system requires warm bodies willing to take on debt, and the supply of those bodies is drying up. The math is fundamentally broken. You cannot have an economy based on infinite debt expansion while simultaneously destroying the people expected to pay it back. The architects built a skyscraper on a foundation of sand, and now they are panicking as the tide comes in. The 20-year clock is ticking. When a society loses the buy-in of its young men, it enters a terminal velocity phase. The trust is gone, and it does not return without a complete reset of the system. History shows us that these cycles end in one of two ways: a slow, painful slide into irrelevance and poverty, or a sudden, catastrophic snapping of the social order. There is no political solution coming to save you. No election will reverse 50 years of financial engineering. The elites who benefit from this system will not voluntarily dismantle it until it collapses out from under them. They will continue to lie to you. They will blame the victims. They will try to shame young men back into the harness. It won't work. The illusion is shattered. The lost generation cycle is the final warning sign before the crash. So, what do you do when the empire is 20 years from the end? You stop relying on the empire. You understand that the checking out isn't just a trend, it's the canary in the coal mine. You realize that the path laid out for you, college, debt, corporate servitude, is a dead end. You have to build your own lifeboat. This means becoming anti-fragile. It means owning assets outside the banking system. Gold, Bitcoin, tangible resources that cannot be inflated away by a desperate central bank. It means developing skills that are useful in the real world, not just the financialized clown world. It means building local communities and networks that don't rely on the collapsing federal structure. The system is dying because it consumed its own future. Don't let it consume yours too. The math has already decided the outcome. The only variable left is how prepared you are for the impact.